Here we go. Okay, hello, welcome everyone. I'm Laura with the North Country Herbalist Guild. We're here tonight with Amanda Nicole. We're going to talk about gentle plant medicine for transmuting trauma. The North Country Herbalist Guild is a nonprofit. We are dedicated to all things herbal education. And as a nonprofit, we do run off of our memberships and donations that folks make. So if you like what you see, please consider becoming a member, nchg.org, or kick us a little cash as a thank you. We'd sure appreciate it. So tonight, again, Ms. Amanda Nicole, who's here from the Blue Ridge Mountains, and she has a podcast called Whispers, Plant Spirit Medicine, and recently wrote a book called, well, I don't know how recently, but Flowers for a Girl, Plant Medicine and Sexual Trauma. She's the mother of 6, and she studied with our very own Matt Wood, among many other people. So we're very excited to have you here tonight, Amanda, and I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, I'm very glad to be here to talk about plants. I love it. So we're going to just dive right in. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen and see how that goes. And there we go. Can everybody see it? Yay. Okay. At least that's going well so far, because technology can be something else. Let's see. There we go. All right. So before we dive in, I'll just say that I will do my best to pay attention to the chat, although I can't see very much of it right now. I'm not used to the way the screen looks. So Lauren, feel free to keep up with it if you don't mind. Thank you. So I like to sing, if that's all right. It's a way that I like to commence a class, and it's also the way that I like to end it, just a way of bringing us into the space together and a way of saying energetically to our bodies and to each other and to the plants that we're beginning, we're starting, you know. So if you just want to take a couple of deep breaths, I'm going to sing. Dear divine, sing through me. Dear divine, let me be your voice, your lips, your breath that's breathed. Dear divine, sing through me. Dear divine, speak through me. Dear divine, let me be your voice, your lips, your breath that's breathed. Dear divine, speak through me. Thank you so much for letting me sing. It helps me come into the space. And that particular song was given to me. It came while I was sitting with the plants, and it very much embodies how I feel about my relationship with the plants and why I'm here and what I'm doing tonight. So a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you about the plants is what I've received from being with them, from listening, from having a relationship with them, not only from books or from human teachers. And for me, they are wise counselors, divine voices, and especially when I'm coming to speak about something like trauma, which requires an enormous amount of care and wisdom, discernment, compassion. You know, it matters to me that what comes through me, you know, is not myself, is that I put that aside, because having experienced trauma myself, as I'm sure many of you have in various forms, we can have a lot of our own thoughts and emotions, and soapboxes come into play, and I want it to be as pure as possible. So thanks for letting me sing. So I think before we'll start with Rose, but before I go to Rose, I'll just give a little backdrop on how I'm going to approach the plants. So it sort of amazed me when I wrote my book, Flowers for a Girl, which came out, I think, in 2017. I was sort of surprised when I looked that at that time, I didn't see any other books that were specifically about plant medicine and sexual trauma, or at that time, any sort of trauma. That may not be the case any longer. I don't know of any, but I was surprised by that because this is a common experience for so many. And in some cases, certain types of trauma, the majority of humans. So I was very surprised by that. And the way that the plants began to come and the way that I ended up writing my book and now the way that I teach is that when I started to work through my own trauma, when I started to, there's so many different words, but integrate it, release it, process it, whatever the words are that we're going to use, the plants just started to come. I would go and I would work with a woman who did energy work and body work as a way of facing or interacting with the trauma, and plants would always come. They would come before my time with her, during my session, after my session, and I would have dreams about them, or maybe some of you do meditations or journeys, and I would receive messages that way, or I would begin to work with it and have understandings or insights. And so I just kept notes. And then one day I realized you have a book. And so that's the way that this came about, is my own experience with the plants, just so you know. So in saying that, some of what I express might be limited because it's my own experience and then the experience that I've had with clients and students. So feel free to share, or what you know, or to add to it. I'm certainly not exhaustive. So the first plant we're going to jump into tonight with this is rose. And sometimes when I present people with rose or other plants I may talk about tonight, I feel like sometimes people sort of like drop their shoulders, like, seriously, like give me something big and amazing and exotic and from someplace else. Maybe that's not how you feel, any of you, but I do sense that energy sometimes when I present rose and some of the other plants. But what I find so beautiful about it is that it's so accessible and it's right here. And we know it, and most of us are probably familiar with it and have some sort of relationship with it. And so this is part of what I think so beautiful about the plants, and especially as they connect to our moving through trauma, is that it's accessible and it's right here. So I'll tell you a little bit of the story of how rose came into play. I have not been a rose girl. The room that I'm in my house right now has green walls, but two of the other rooms, they're rose colored. When I sit in those, you can see them. And there was a time in my life, no wall in my house would have been rose colored. I didn't wear rose. I didn't pink and reds, and just, it was too feminine for me. It didn't resonate. I didn't consider myself a flower girl. When I was younger, I wore a lot of black. I wasn't goth, but I wore black. It concerned my grandmother. She thought I needed to bring more color into my world. But I experienced a season where I was very sick and I suffered several consecutive miscarriages. And so I started to make a lot of lifestyle changes. And one of them was to change what I was using on my face, the cosmetics. And instead of using the oils and creams and things that are out there, over the counter type things, I started working with rose water as an astringent. I was drawn to it. And I spritzed it on my face the first time and I loved it. And so I spritzed rose water on my face every day for 2 years before I had my first flashback or memory. I don't know how people define those or experience them or what their thoughts were, but I know when it happened to me, I don't watch TV. I haven't had one in almost 20 years. I don't watch those kinds of movies. I'm not feeding myself those kinds of experiences or drama. And when it happened, and I told my teacher at the time, Teresa, board one at Green Comfort, who I was mentioning before when Laura and I were speaking, she was like, so that's a flashback, Amanda. Because I didn't really understand. And what I came to learn as I worked with Rose is that Rose is a medicine not only for the heart, but for the eyes, for clear seeing. So right before I began to remember, I was with Teresa and we were doing something where we would put a drop of a tincture on our wrist, and then what do you see? What do you experience? Where does it go in your body? Just as a way of connecting to the plants. So when it was my turn, they didn't say what was in the bottle, you know, and I had my eyes closed just to focus. And I felt my heart go out and reach for the bottle, like, and bring the bottle in before they ever even touched my wrist. And so that's primarily where I felt it, was in my heart. And it was a subtle moment with it. There wasn't really much else to say. But when I went and sat over on the couch and she started working with someone else, suddenly the room became crystal clear. I mean, the mantle on the fireplace, I could see the curve of the line. It was like a snow globe or something. I've never seen that clearly since then. Everything was crystalline, pure in its lines. So much so that I exclaimed out loud, oh my goodness, I can see, like in this, you know, startled voice. And my teacher, Teresa, looked over and said, all right, Amanda, all right. Like, you know, I don't know what's happening, but it was a moment for me that stuck with me. And so when I began to remember, I realized that those 2 years of spritzing Rose on my face was a way of bringing in this medicine that was going to help me see clearly. And the flashback for me was something like, literally, there was a curtain that someone was trying to pull back, and I didn't want them to. I kept yanking the curtain back. I didn't want to see what was behind the curtain. And so we talk about rose-colored glasses. And sometimes when we have experienced trauma in various forms, of course, mine is particularly with sexual trauma, but really there's similarities how the way the body responds. We can often have rose-colored glasses, a Pollyannish view of life. So I went through saying nothing but good things about my upbringing, even though my parents had gotten divorced. They had this sort of arguments where there was broken glass, a wall got punched out. We weren't doing well financially. I'm comfortable, I think, using the word poor. The house was cinder block, and water would like pour in the wall of the dining room when it rained because the cinder block was like cracked. In the bathroom, like there was holes in the walls, you could see the pipes and just things like this, you know. There was a lot there that was difficult, but I just always remembered it as like wonderful and like blissful and perfect, and I didn't have any complaints, you know. And so I didn't want to remember something that was going to shatter the view that I had chosen to hold that had helped me like survive, you know, and move through life. So Rose began to help to open my eyes to clear seeing, like, this is what really happened. This is what it was really like. This is a truth you need to see. But the lovely thing about Rose is that as it's making it so that you can see clearly and no longer see through those rose-colored glasses, it holds your heart. And that's the part of Rose we know primarily is the heart medicine, but it holds your heart, because the reason that you don't want to look at the trauma, the reason that you don't want to face it, the reason that we might want to keep the veil pulled is because really our fear can be, my heart will shatter, like, or it'll stop. And my heart won't be able to take this. And so what Rose does is say, actually, it will, because I've got it. I'm holding it and I've got it. So this is a really lovely plant to bring in that way as a hydrosol, a tincture, a flower essence in your baths. I mean, it's Rose, however you want to bring it in. But I also think it's beautiful when we've experienced trauma, because for me, I specifically connect Rose to betrayal. And so a lot of times when we have experienced trauma, there's betrayal on some level. There's someone or something, an institution, a person, a place that we thought would keep us safe, and it didn't. Maybe it's a belief system. Maybe it was ourselves, you know? And there's a level of betrayal there that is often needing to be mended, you know? So it's really a beautiful plant to bring in for that aspect that we sometimes experience with trauma. There's something else that's wanting to come through. Hold on just a moment. Also with trauma, as most of you are probably aware, different forms of trauma, we can come to a place where we don't trust ourselves, you know? We don't trust what we see. We don't trust what we feel. Maybe we trusted this person or this place. We followed our hearts. Our hearts were open. It led us astray some way. And I mean, I don't just mean that within a sexual trauma way, but maybe even a car accident that we're in and our body is experiencing this trauma, you know, where we begin to not be able to trust that we have the ability to know like which way to turn or to have the right discernment or judgment in situations, you know, and we lose that. And another lovely aspect of Rose is where it gets us back in touch with our hearts, which often we've shut down and closed off because of what's happened. So we can begin to get in touch with our hearts again and trust them again. Trust them again and have that part of us be part of our embodiment in the world, part of our decision making. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I was moving through life without my heart being part of my decision making process, that was not going well. You know, but to begin to return to my heart, to trust my heart, to see how it feels, what it notices, what it wants. This is a much better way to be moving through the world. And it helps us to open our hearts again. Obviously, it's Rose. So I'll start there with that one. And this often is a plant that I do often offer early on in the process as someone is moving through, you know, where I've had people come where they think they might, but they're not, and you know, and I think to myself, well, just start with Rose. What is it that you don't want to see? What is it that you don't want to look at? And that can even be in, you could be experiencing physical or emotional trauma in a relationship with someone, a partner or a parent or a friend. You know, you need to see what's really here and what's happening. I love it too, because a lot of the trauma we can experience when we talk about emotional abuse, emotional trauma, or domestic violence and these sorts of things is we are not feeling loved in those moments. We are not, and we lose any self-love we may have had, you know. And so Rose is a really lovely plant to return to self-love, self-trust, self-worth, while it gives us the clear seen eyes. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say about Rose at this time. There may be questions at the end. And I'm going to move forward to the next plant, because if I don't, I will stay on one plant. So the next plant that I want to move to is violet. This is another one that's very simple and I feel can be disappointing for people sometimes. And again, it's one that is accessible. It's right there. We go out, it's in our yards, we can gather it, the leaves and the flowers, and use it in this way. For me, the way that violet has been helpful is primarily, as you might expect, with the voice. So when I began to remember, I told Matthew Wood, actually, that it was while I was remembering, actually, that I started taking my first classes with Matt over 10 years ago. That was a real gift, because he has a masculine energy that is very balanced and kind and safe. So it was really lovely to have space held, you know, during that season. Oh, which makes me have to say something about Rose. one pause about Rose. When I first started to begin to remember, I was concerned about who do I get to help me? Because you don't just go into the yellow pages and Google or Google. What is that? I'm combining yellow pages and Googling, but you get the idea. You don't just do that. Well, we were in class one of the weekends that I was learning from Matt, and he was talking about the fascia and how memory is held in the fascia in the body. And he was talking about how one of, if not the most concentrated places in the body for the fascia is around the heart. And so he said to the woman who ended up being my practitioner when I first began, he called out to her and said, when you're doing body work with people who need to remember something, is there a certain plant or oil, that you use? And she said, rose. I use rose. And as soon as she said it, I was already kind of like wound up in my chair, like with my knees up around my arms, just from the conversation that was being had. But I knew she was my person because, like I told you, I've been spritzing it on my face for 2 years. And so she's who I began with. So that's something else that I'll offer again. And you've got that heart connection with the remembering again, that she's bringing up. So moving into Violet, it was for the voice. So I said to Matt after one of these classes and we were talking, I said, I have a goal. And I want you guys to know I don't do goals. I don't do them because at least not up to this point in my life, because, they usually don't come about in the way I thought. I'm not a New Year's resolution, type person. I'm much more with the flow, but I felt like I needed a goal. And my goal was to be able to call my dad. That's who the trauma was connected to. And I wanted to be able to say, I know, I remember. I just wanted to be able to say it. And what I said to Matt was, because I feel like this really isn't mine to carry. It's not mine. I didn't do this. So I want to give it back. And I love what Matt said. He said, I'm so glad. He said, people talk about releasing stuff. And I think, don't just release that out into the ethers. That needs someplace to go, and it needs like where it belongs. So what was so fascinating is that Violet had been with me at that point for years. It had been growing in my backyard, which was sunny, like all sun, but almost my entire backyard where I was living at the time was covered in violets. And the children and I would go out and it would feel so cool and so nice. And we would gather them and I would make syrups and we would make candied violets. And I just loved them. I delighted in them. And it was actually Violet that helped me say what I needed to say. And it goes back again to that moment, those practices with Teresa, where she would drop things on our hands or our wrists. And one of the times that happened to me, again, not knowing the plant, I felt this little ball right here at the base of my throat, a perfect little lavender ball. And I started to laugh and it just bubbled up and fell out of my lips. And I was like, whoa, I just love that plant. And it was Violet. So what happened was, after I started to remember and have to process and face what had happened, I got that right there, that pit in my throat, and I recognized it. That's what's so lovely about being with plants. You start to recognize how you feel them, how you experience them in your body. And I felt it right there. And I thought, I need Violet. That's what that's asking for. And I actually felt, while I was working with Violet as a tincture primarily at that time, I actually felt that ball move up my throat and kind of lodge in the center over time. And eventually it got to like the very back of my throat. And at that point, sometimes I would vomit for hours while I was remembering. Again, that's interesting. I was using Violet at the time because the root is an emetic. I mean, you're trying to purge, and really you're trying to purge out a lot, but part of it is what you need to say. There's a plug, and when I felt it in the back of my throat, I remember saying to my partner at the time, can you get the phone and dial this number? And as soon as I say these 2 sentences, you can hang up. And he was like, are you sure that's a good idea? Like, please. So he dialed the number and I just said, I remember. I know what you did. And then he hung up the phone and I laid over on his shoulder because I was exhausted from like the vomiting, but I was smiling and it was gone. and that pit in my throat. You know, I haven't had it in there since then, you know? So it's a really lovely plant for if you're needing to find your voice, if you're needing to say what you need to say. So a lot of times, all different sorts of trauma, we can be hushed up about it, silenced. It doesn't have to be sexual trauma. It can be emotional trauma, physical trauma. It could even be, like I mentioned before, if you have an accident, a car accident, or trauma, a loss, a fire, losing your home through a fire. You know, sometimes you can't get out what you need to get out. You can't express the grief that has come from the trauma. You can't say what you need to say about it, whether it's the grief or the anger that we can feel from the trauma. So one of the ways that I'll use violet is for anger that expresses as sadness. So you're crying and people think you're sad, but you're actually very angry, you know, but the anger can almost be overwhelming. So let's shift and cry. Or it can be so fiery, you think, I'm going to destroy everything, you know, if I let it be anger. Or you can be in settings like I have been here in the South, in religious groups, and as a woman, where anger is not an acceptable emotion, but we let you cry, you know? So anger that expresses as sadness, which is often, they're often kind of also closely related with trauma because of the grief, because violet is for grief, the grief that you're experiencing. And what it does is it helps us to release it. So maybe there's something you need to say, or maybe you need to finally wail, or you need to cry, or you need to scream, or whatever it is that's needing to come out. So self-expression, whatever is the self-expression that you need. And then what's so lovely about it is after you work with it for a time and you've cried what you need to cry, and you've said what you need to say, and and know this, when violet helps you experience your anger, you don't have to be afraid. It's not like a floodgate. It actually helps you express your anger in a violet way, in a firm, productive way. It's going to have that nature to it. So you don't have to be afraid. Once you've done that, remember I told you there was like that giggle that I felt afterwards. This is what I've experienced with it. Then you have space for joy. You have space for the joy then. Because before then, there's not space. It's full. It's full of grief. It's full of anger. It's full of sadness, you know? But then you make space, and then you can laugh. You can have joy. You can feel like lightness again. And this is true. this is what I've experienced and what others experience over and over again. And sometimes it takes a while. You know, sometimes it takes years of violet being a part of you, because the plants are very wise and your body is very wise. So you're not going to do all of this integrating in a weekend. You know, there's a lot of wisdom because you want to survive. You want to live, usually. You know, the plants can come and help with that too. And so they make sure that that's possible so that you're not re-traumatized or overwhelmed again. And also, we also know violet as a lymphatic. And I will say that it really, that idea of deep waters in the body, drawing up those deep waters, like what's sitting down in those deep waters, what's stagnant down in those deep waters. I'll tell you something, and you guys probably know, sometimes we don't even know what is sitting down there, you know, but we want to really. Like if we were able to go deep and ask our hearts, we want to, because we want the waters to run clean. You know, we want that. We want movement. We don't want stagnation. I do want to pause there. This is a plant that I don't have a picture of tonight, but I know you guys will be familiar with it probably, which is cleavers. Cleavers is your friend when you are struggling with the rage. Rage is the word I would use. That can often come from trauma. Just the rage that from the pain that this has happened to you, whatever the trauma might be. You might rage at what you might call the divine or God. You might rage at a person or a place or an idea or a belief or yourself. You know, but when there's that rage that comes, the way I experienced cleavers was I was on the table once in one of my sessions, and it was so peaceful. And then she says to me, "Do you feel that, Amanda? Do you feel the rage?" And I was like in bliss land. You know how it is when you're having like energy work done. And I said, "No." And she said, "Let's try it. Let's try to feel it." And so she put her hand somewhere, I guess over my heart or whatever, I don't recall. And I suddenly just jolted and said, I can't do it. I can't feel it." And I said out loud, "My heart will stop," and she quit. And she said, "We don't have to do that. We don't have to do it today. It's okay." Well, cleavers was with me the whole next month before my next session. It just kept coming, and I drank cleavers water, and I wanted to carry it around, and I made cleavers crowns, not knowing what it was going to do. And then in my next session with her, I said, "Can I have it in the room with me? I just want it in the room with me." And she said, "Sure." So I laid it actually on a bone. It was did you say occipital? Am I getting that wrong? Occiput? I'm not very good. I'm sorry. Bone on the back of the head. She had a bone there, and I laid it in that bone, and that really matters. And I didn't know it. So when she did it, she didn't tell me we were going to try to feel the rage again. And she probably didn't have that intention. Oh dear. Let's see. Okay, the video's back. She probably didn't have that intention, but I suddenly saw my heart, and I looked at my heart, and bubbling up out of my heart was just like tarry black. And I was like, "Oh my goodness," because that is not what we want to see with our heart. And cleavers showed up, and she was very happy, and she said, "I can help you." And she like dove down into that bubbling up black fountain, and she acted like a chimney sweep and just kept pulling up like gunk out of my heart. And I just started to hear the phrase, "Till the waters run clean," you know? And then I was like, "Oh, I can do this." And so my little self that I was seeing, grabbed hold of it with her and started to pull it up, and then the waters, they started to run clean. So this is, again, it's another lymphatic when we talk about the waters running clean, but there is rage. I don't know how we get around it being there, even if we don't think we feel it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that I had those emotions till she said, "Let's tap into it." So that's what I'll also mention is cleavers for the rage. And it's also a lovely nervine, as Matt talks about, and he'll talk about like the deer in the headlights look, sometimes that he'll see for people that need cleavers. And also he'll talk about like sensitive skin with cleavers, that connection to the nervous system where they're really sensitive to like fabrics or maybe extra ticklish or whatever. And I don't know all the reasons that might come up for someone, but I know for me, when I began, and it could be this way before you are conscious of things, or maybe it won't happen until after, but I was just jumpy. I mean, someone would walk into a room and I would just startle, like we're deer in the headlights, nervous, this sort of thing. So you can bring in the cleavers. All right, we're going to move to the next plant. Okay, so I'm going to be very good with Tulip Poplar. Any of you who have had any exposure with me previous to this will know that this is the tree of my heart. I love this. There is going to be a book on Tulip Poplar. It wants it written. It needs to be written. It can fill a book or two. I love this plant. So for Tulip Poplar, I've worked with it just simply to sit with it and be with it, but also the inner bark as a tincture you can work with, or the flower essence. I don't know if you guys have a lot of Tulip Poplar out where you are. We have a lot here. And if there's things about this plant that resonate with you, I can share a link to my friend Deb Vale, who's also Matt's mutual friend of ours. I met her in that first class series, actually, and she makes a really lovely Tulip Poplar flower essence. Okay, so I'm going to do my best. Just know there's so much. First, Tulip Poplar was the first tree that spoke to me. The first tree that I experienced plant communication with. And I write about this in my book where I stood beside of a tulip poplar and I put my hand on one, and I thought there was only one. And then I heard, "Look over here, put your hand on me." And there was actually another, and I was standing between two of them. And then I just closed my eyes to just enjoy them. I was standing by a creek and the sun was shining. It was like an autumn afternoon. And then suddenly they both became so tall and they swung me between them and like a child. And I heard the phrase, "We will be your parents." And it was really beautiful, but I thought to myself, I have parents. But that was going to change because, as many of you may know, when we start to work with trauma, especially if it's trauma connected to our families and family dynamics, or like with me, the sexual trauma, or maybe even if we work through trauma with something that's happened to us outside of our families, but as we work through it, we can become difficult, as my mom would say. You're being difficult, and people, they can't handle it. They can't handle the pain. So sometimes they don't stick around. And so what was going to happen was that as I began to remember, my dad was not going to be my dad anymore. Like, I was still going to love him, but the image that I had of him, I don't have that. That's not your dad. That's not the dad. I mean, he is good and loving. It's amazing. Give people space to change. Tulip Poplar teaches that. But the memory I had was not so. And then my mom, she's gone. She said, I had a lovely relationship with her, I thought. But when I began to remember, she just could not process that, as you might imagine, because they don't want to, they feel responsible, guilty, So it did become my parents. And so I think that this is a really lovely thing for people who have experienced various forms of trauma, where even if your parents are physically around, maybe emotionally they're not, that connection's not there, but we need parents, you know? So it's also very lovely, very specific about the Divine Mother, and beginning to teach me, you are the Divine Mother. You can tap into the Divine Mother and mother yourself, So we will be your parents. And I also offer this, that, specifically it's spoken to me also about people who become orphans or are taken from their families for some reason. That's the trauma of that, So bringing that in. Also, Tulip Poplar is lovely for, Matt called it the Jesus tree. And the reason he called it the Jesus tree in his book was because he says it's for those that feel unforgivable. Well, this is part of its medicine, and it's lovely because, again, when we're experiencing trauma, especially when we talk about betrayal and things like that can happen, like, we can feel like what we've done is unforgivable, like if we feel we've participated in it, but we can sometimes feel what has been done to us by another person or institution or group is unforgivable. And so Tulip Poplar is really good for bringing that in. And I know it's really hard, so I always try to take care when I say this, because it can be so upsetting to people, and people have different ways of defining this word. But what Tulip Poplar has taught me is there really isn't anything that's unforgivable, because it starts to pull us up and out to realize that there's not really anything to forgive, which is a lot. So you don't have to get that tonight. And I'm still working on it. But it really works with that, because as long as we're caught in that, this is the other aspect of what I told I was like, there's more to the Jesus tree. This idea of setting captives free. So that's one of the passages that was used in Isaiah to speak of Jesus as setting captives free. But it has wild Mustang medicine, freedom. So when we experience various forms of trauma, we really become captive, to that trauma. We're in cages emotionally. Even our bodies can become that way. And so this is a plant that helps us to move through physically, emotionally, spiritually, to a place of freedom. So one of the images that I had with it was when my mom said to me, "That's it, I'm finished with you." That's how she put it, I couldn't even stand up straight for 3 or 4 days. I was bent at the waist, and I have to like consciously pull myself up. Like, it was a core loss. And one day I felt Tulip Poplar telling me, like, get outside, get up, go outside. And I started to feel it telling me, like, you survived that. Like not just the trauma, but you survived her leaving. And you're still here. Get up, go outside. So I got up, but I thought, am I gonna be able to do this? Because I found myself drawn to this grove of trees. And I remember going out thinking, I'm like this little bird that like got tossed out of the nest, and like I can't even get my wings to work. That's how I was feeling. And I ended up in this grove of trees, the sweet gum, maple, tulip poplar, lots of tulip poplar. And I felt them telling me to run, like high five them, because tulip poplar, like she'll wave to you, with her leaves. I was like, I can't do that. But I gave it a go and it worked. And I started to run circles and leap up and high five them. And there just started to be all this joy. And I started to have all this energy. And they were like cheering me on, like, go, 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 like, go, Amanda, the way you would like before like basketball games when they run out, between the team lines, and everybody's cheering. That's what it felt like. And when it was over, I heard that Bible passage in my mind, setting captives free. And what I saw was an image of myself in a cage, and the door was open and I could leave. And in the past, I had seen that cage, but my parents were on the outside of it. And so like, I'm not going to walk out. They're just going to grab me and put me back in. I'm probably going to be in more trouble than I was, originally. But at this moment, they were gone. And it was like, you're free. You're free. You can step out. You can be free. So whatever trauma has occasioned us to feel trapped by it, where we feel like we'll never be free of this. This is part of what Tulip Poplar brings, is the wild Mustang medicine. And I love the wild Mustang word because what it teaches is you were born free. This is your nature. This is your essence, so this is one of the ways that it's helpful and brings it back. It's also really lovely. It's a heart medicine. The tinctures use as a heart tonic and all sorts of physical properties for the heart. But it's really beautiful when there's vulnerability, when the heart is vulnerable. You know how you can feel sometimes where, everything that's said hurts, you're just raw. And so Tulip Poplar is really lovely to come in and tend to those vulnerable places, particularly with the heart, but those vulnerable places. Its bark is really easy to slip on and slip off, like in the spring to like summer solstice. And it's that kind of armor. Slip it on, slip it off, slip it on, slip it off. And underneath, it has the sweetest smell. And that's one of the things that it likes to teach, is that you have a golden heart. You have a golden heart. And like the flower there's no filter on that picture. It's there to catch the light. You are a conduit, a channel of divine light. That's who you are. This is your essence. This is what you can hold. So instead of holding the stories of our trauma, the effects of it, the emotions, as we begin to integrate and process, we return to our original state, which is this divine conduit, this channel, that's able to hold the light. You see this seed pod there with the dagger. Maybe you can see there's the picture on the one side with the leaf, and then right beside it, that's where there was a seed pod and they've fallen away and opened. And now you just have this sharp, pointy spot in the center. And for me, that's always been a dagger. And it told me, like, if you don't use me, this is how it's going to feel. Like a dagger. Go ahead.
We don't see the slide.
Oh, you don't see this
slide?
one?
I don't think any, right?
Let's see. Can you see it now?
No slide. I don't.
Let me try it again.
Oh, somebody else has seen both slides. Okay, it might just be mine.
Okay.
It's my view. Okay.
Okay,
Good.
that's all right. Well, I want to be sure people can see it. So it's like a dagger to the heart is what it's trying to say. A dagger to the heart. And betrayal comes into play here because Tulip Poplar is very connected to the back of the heart. So conditions that affect the back of the heart, or if people say they feel pain, and sometimes it may not be their heart that's causing the pain, but they'll point to on their back, like the back of the heart is tulip poplar. And again, if we think about that, that dagger to the heart, the betrayal, you know, the back of the heart, it really comes into play. It's also a really lovely plant physically for people who have been chronically ill and are recovering from a chronic illness. And my friend Rebecca Dawn, who I just love, of Mulberry Mud, she's a wonderful sculptor and herbalist, and she said, what is more chronic than trauma? Right? What is more chronic than trauma? And it also is a wonderful tonic for the reproductive system, also stimulates the appetite. So, you know, because we don't want to eat, you know, sometimes when we're thinking about those things, and it's very acrid in its taste. And so it, like dogwood, which I won't get to talk about tonight probably, but dogwood is another plant with an acrid taste that's I would recommend for trauma. And that taste goes right to the autonomic nervous system, right where that's being stored, you know, where we have that fight, flight, freeze, vomit. They keep listing new ways that we're expressing this. And so tulip poplar is really lovely for that. I wish I taught whole class series on tulip poplar. There's so much more to say, but tonight I'll let it stand there with those things. This is a really beautiful plant. Blue heron medicine is with tulip poplar medicine. She who knows how to stand alone. You know, so sometimes when we experience trauma, we are left alone. Like even literally, like if we think about someone who, you know, loses like family members through like a difficult, like a storm or something like that, or you know, just ways, or all of our friends, suddenly they're just gone because we're too much for them right now. Or we have friends, we have family, and yet nobody can feel what we're feeling and do the work. It's ours to do, you know? So blue heron, she who knows how to stand alone. All right, we're gonna move forward. I'm really proud of myself watching the time because I can get lost in these. I want to give myself an award. All right, so this is black cohosh. This is a beautiful plant for trauma. So beautiful. So most of you will know it for the spine, cerebral spinal fluid, the nervous system, any fluids in the body, moving the blood. So my first experience with it was in a session. The practitioner that I was with, that I've mentioned several times, Katie. How does that keep happening? All right, I'm back. I think I'm accidentally touching something with my hand. I saw myself floating above my body in one of these sessions, and I was looking down on the house that I had grown up in, and I was just sort of hovering over it. This is what I was seeing, just laying there. And she says to me, "Where are you, Amanda?" And I told her, I'm floating above the house I grew up in. And she said, "Let's not go there today." She said, let's go to your spine, find your spine. And I was like, I don't know how to find that. And when I found it, it looked awful. It was like a fossilized bone. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't think it's supposed to look like that, you know? And I lowered down into it, and I had this feeling of like, there's a plant for this, because usually there's a plant for everything. And suddenly I saw above my head, and at this point in my journey, I hadn't seen this in person yet. But I saw above my head the gnarled, twisted up root of black cohosh. And I knew it. I saw it and knew it, that that's what it was. And as soon as I saw it and knew it, I saw along my spine all of these white lights lighting up, just like the flower. And then I heard the practitioner with this really excited voice say, "Do you feel that? Do you feel that?" And I wasn't really feeling anything, but I was seeing things. And she said, "Your nervous system is coming back online, Amanda." And that is how I've experienced black cohosh for myself and with others, that it's like almost like a breaker. So it looked like the horizon of a city, my spine did. I saw these lights lighting up like a horizon, like when it starts to become dark and suddenly everybody starts turning their lights on in their house, or suddenly all the street lights start coming on. So if your nervous system has been offline, if you need a breaker, you know, and it didn't, to say breaker can sound really powerful. but it was very gentle, you know, the way that I experienced it, but to wake it back up. And then what I started to feel was, and she told me, she said, ride it. I started to feel and see cerebral spinal fluid moving up and down my spine again, you know, lubricating and moving. I will say at the base of my spine, it would get to a spot that looked like that gnarled root and it would jump over it. And I've had more than one practitioner since then say, we'll just leave that. And I think that's okay, because we don't have to do everything. We don't have to do all the work. Our body will do it. It will manage, it will care for us, you know. But I was going back and forth, feeling the cerebral spinal fluid up and down my spine, you know. What I experienced also with black cohosh, and I've seen it with others, is Matt talks about how it can help draw out a rash like measles, which you might want to happen. Well, I've also seen with black cohosh that if you use it and it's time for you to release certain traumas, you will get rashes. For me, my whole mouth inside was full of sores. I could hardly talk or eat. But then I've seen people, they'll just get like a rash on their arm, and you know, where did that come from? Or what, you know. So I do tell people, I can't know that that's what's going to happen. I don't know how each person's going to respond, but I let them know if that's a part of their pictures, they're engaging with it, that you may end up with a rash. You know, it's okay. Like it's drawing it out. You don't actually want it in there. We want this to draw up and to come out. But I just love the spire of light here. And Matt talks about, he even mentions how it's for people who've been in manipulative relationships. He connects it to financial abuse, particularly, also physical abuse. Yeah, so there's more that can be said about it, but you can use this as a tincture with the root, the flower essence. I really love flower essences. Just simply sitting with the plant, being with the plant. This is often a plant that also I bring in when people, like, you can feel like the dark, heavy energy on them. Like it's what they've experienced hovers over them. Not everybody's like that. You know, people experience trauma in different ways and the effects it has. But some people, you can feel it, or they will tell you they feel it. Like it's hovering over them. It's a weight. It's a dark cloud. Or if people will use the word entity or something like that they're feeling, if they talk about it in that way, then I will bring in black cohosh. So I'm really proud of myself, because y'all do not know how I can just sit with one plant and go on and on for forever. So we have a few more minutes before it's time for questions. So I'm just going to talk about a couple more plants, if that's okay, and then we'll open up for the questions. This plant can sometimes be controversial, but I'm going to mention it anyway because of how powerful it is. So ghost pipe or Indian pipe is a plant that I know some people take a lot of care, not wanting to over harvest it. You don't have to use the tincture. You can use a flower essence. There are those who make the flower essence in a kind way. Like you don't even have to pick the flower. You know, you can just put a little bowl up to its little bloom and let it sit there. Or, and I'm very much like this, you can just have a picture of it with you. And that was one of the things that wowed me once, you know, all those years ago when I was with Matt in a clinical setting. He kept saying to myself and this other woman who was there, can you go get this? Can you go get that? You know, and we'd go over and we'd get a bottle and he'd drop it on the person's wrist and he'd test their pulse. Well, there was this one particular person that he was really struggling with, and that's its own story for another day, because it's actually kind of a funny story between he and I. But he just got so frustrated and had enough of it, which is really unlike him, that he started to write the names of the plants on a piece of paper and just stick it in the person's hand and then feel their pulse. And I remember looking and thinking, what? Magic is real, you know? So this is true though. It's the frequency, it's the vibration of it. So you could just get a picture of ghost pipe or write the word down. But most of you have probably heard that it's used for, I mean, just exquisite pain relief, but it's called a disassociative. It disassociates. That's part of how it works with the pain in the body, is to disassociate. And so we know when we experience trauma, we often do, we exit the body, you know? And so it can help us disassociate, but it can do the flip side and help us come back in. And part of how it does it is, like Rose, in my experience, if you're already outside the body, then it helps you turn and look and see what it is you're needing to see so that you can reconcile and re-enter. Or if you are in the body well enough, but you're needing to step outside for a moment, like you need some distance from it, you can work with ghost pipe in that way. And the worst thing that I had to face, ghost pipe showed up. And it was the only time that I've ever been in a meditation, or, when you're quiet, I don't know what words you all use, a journey or whatever. And usually, like, you're just peaceful, and no matter what you're saying, it's usually lovely. And even if it's like a little active, your heart rate and all that stays the same and you're peaceful. That was the first time, and I wasn't using ghost pipe. Ghost pipe just came as it was happening. Was what I saw wasn't pleasant. That had never happened to me before. And my heart started to race and my breathing became shallow, but I remained in that state. I mean, that's how difficult that was. But it had me sit up on a cloud with an angel and to look down. And I was like trying to crawl off the angel's lap to like get away. But it was like, you have to sit here and you have to look, like you need to see. And so from quite a distance away with an angelic presence, I still wasn't inclined to watch, but it did. And the first time that ghost pipe came to me before that session, I was with Asia Solar. I don't know if some of you know her, of One Willow Apothecaries. I really love her. She's in North Carolina. And we were just doing a journey, and you see what plant comes. And ghost pipe came. And I remember it was in the middle of the woods and a light was shining down on it. And I looked at it and thought, no, I don't want to work with you. No, because like it's ghost pipe, it's like scary. It has this reputation. And I just said, no, I don't want you. I don't want to work with you. And it scared me. And it said the sweetest thing. It said, I'm not scary. Not really, no plant is. They're good, It says, I'm not scary. What scares you is what I'm here to do. Like the work that we're here to do, and it was so very true. So I do want to offer it, even though it's controversial for some with the harvesting. I don't disagree with, depending on where you are. You can use the essence, you can write down the picture, but it's really a good one to have in your pocket. It's also, strangely enough, and I hope this isn't too much for someone, but it's very much connected to basements. There was a group that worked with it in a homeopathic way. And one of the images that kept coming to people again and again as they were working with it was basements. And I don't even like saying that, frankly, out loud, but the world, it doesn't always have the best things happening, And so this is one of its associations. I'm going to do one more before I open it up for questions, if you don't mind. I like to listen and see who wants to come. Chicory. So chicory, I don't have a picture of it here. It's a lovely blue flower. Often the root is what's used, and it's for the liver. It goes along with, dandelion and others, sometimes as a coffee substitute. So chicory has bluebird medicine, the bluebird of happiness. And the message that chicory gives is that good things can and will happen to you. So often when we experience trauma, we have in our minds that nothing good happens to us. Our experience of the world is such that the world is scary now, and it's dangerous, and it's not safe, and that somehow we're magnets or something, for difficulties and for trauma. Or we always think to ourselves, the other shoe's going to drop, after a loss, or even when we find ourselves, I don't really like this term, but the people will use like self-sabotaging, because we're living in like a triggered state. you know, so we'll think like someone's mad at us and they're not, or we'll think that someone's abandoned us and they haven't, or we think we're in trouble for something and we aren't, but then we respond that way and the situation is disrupted. So Chicory comes in and begins to shift how you're experiencing the world, begins to shift your perspective. And again, like Tulip Poplar, bring you back to your essence. Your essence is that good things can and will happen to you. You know, you don't have to wait for the other shoe to drop. You don't have to move through the world with these sets of triggers. You know, you don't have to do that. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot. But the plants are really lovely how they're able to bring in, whether you use chicory as a tincture or a flower essence, which I really love the chicory flower essence, or you use it as a substitute for your coffee, or you just sit with it, or you plant it, or however you want to be with it. And it begins to make these subtle shifts inside of you and move through the layers, you know, to where you're able to think to yourself, no, this could happen. This could happen to me, you know? I'm also wanting to bring in lady slipper. Again, this is one that you're not harvesting, obviously, even more than ghost pipe. But you can get the flower essence easily, and then you can have the pictures. So lady slipper, before it was taken out of use, the root was used as a strong reproductive tonic and a deep nervine. And so we obviously have connections right there if we're working with sexual trauma. But one of the things that's so beautiful about lady slipper, if you've ever seen one, and am I right that it's the state flower, I think, of Minnesota? Am I right about that? Yeah. Is that it's very sexual, but it's so innocent. There's such an innocence to it. And that first picture where I just had the title, Plant Medicine and Trauma, lady's mantle was in the background. And that's another plant like lady slipper that's connected to like being able to return to innocence. You know, a lot of times when we experience trauma, of course, we're feeling its effect in our bodies, but all of that is just manifestations of the emotions that are inside of us. We've lost our innocence. The world isn't good anymore. You know, I'm not safe anymore. But this ability, both lady slipper and lady's mantle, can help return back to that innocence. But the special medicine of lady slipper, a part of it is feeling. You can feel it. That was one of the things that it said to me was you can feel it. You know, because we can be really afraid. We can be afraid to feel again in our body, not only our emotions, but our body. And I feel like lady slipper is especially connected to feeling things in the body. And one of those things is pleasure. So if we have experienced sexual trauma, it can be scary, you know, to feel anything again, you know, not just pain, but even pleasure, but even other types of pleasure in the body. We can be afraid to feel that again because it can even pleasure, and not just sexual pleasure, even just dancing or eating good food or having someone hug you or whatever feeling in the body, that can be too stimulating, you know, and we shut down because even though it's not a painful stimulus anymore, it's too much, you know. And so lady slipper tells us you can feel it. Now, of course, it has the particular relationship to the root, but really it's for just being alive, you know, being alive again and being able to feel again and take pleasure in being alive again. So you can work with that as an essence. And then, as you might imagine, with the lady slipper image, it's very much for walking your path. So sometimes, you know, I was at the park today and I was listening to these two women talk. And, you know, I have my problems, you have yours, we have our circumstances, we have the things we're struggling with, our difficulties, and we know everybody else has them too, but not really, you know. I was at the park today and I overheard these women talking, and one of the women mentioned that she had gone to culinary school. And I heard the other woman say to her, "Oh, what did you end up doing with that?" And she said, "Well, I was a chef in a restaurant for, it was just a short time, like just a couple of 3 years or something." And then she said, "But then I ended up with brain damage and, I'm not doing that anymore." And the other one was obviously caught off guard and said, "Brain damage?" And she mentioned how something had fallen, it had hit her on the head. Anyways, and she couldn't continue to cook in that capacity and work in that way. And then she was saying it had been 7 years since then. And, and she was kind of blowing it off, like saying, "It's not a big deal. It's been 7 years. I'm much better." But she did say she doesn't cook anymore, you know? And I thought about how, she didn't know that. She didn't know, when she went to culinary school, she was so excited, and imagined this life that she was going to have, you know? And then she has this accident and she experiences this trauma to her body and to her brain. And now it's different. It's not what she expected, but this is her path. This is her path. And we each have it. We each have our path. And Lady Slipper is really lovely for walking your path. Now, there's really positive aspects of that, like Cinderella shoes and fitting into the glass slipper and, being the, being Cinderella, having that sort of story, it's very much that. But between here and there, if we're talking about Cinderella, and that's how Matt and I had talked about Lady Slipper sometimes, was Cinderella. Between here and there, she is Cinderella. She's abused by her stepmother and her stepsister. She's lost her father. She's lost her mother. She sleeps with rats. Her name is after the fact that she sleeps in a fire. I mean, you get the idea. Between here and there, there's a path to walk, And so Lady Slipper is really lovely for, you can do this. So sometimes people look ahead of themselves at like, I have to walk this work I'm going to have to do with this trauma, emotionally and physically. I have to walk that, that's scary, and Lady Slipper is like, you can do it. You can walk your path. And I feel like what it teaches, which I really love, with how it has to grow and, it can take like 20 years or something for it to finally bloom. But when you find Lady Slipper, no one's ever disappointed, when you find it in the woods. And that's what's so lovely about it, is like, it'll be worth it. The end result is worth it. The healing is worth it. The beauty's worth it. The bloom, when it finally comes, is worth it. Which makes me have to say one more thing, and then I'll stop for questions. Mullein, for you can open slowly. You can take your time with the work. And shame anger, mullein, for you're angry because you're feeling shame, a shame about what's happened to you, or shame that's put on you. So shame anger. There could be more said about mullein, but that wants to come out, is the shame anger. And you can open slowly. You can take your time. You can be a late bloomer. None of this has to happen tomorrow, and the idea of you won't miss your mark. You won't miss it. It's never too late. So don't worry, if the trauma that you've experienced, you feel like, I lost, X amount of years to that, this many decades to that. It's okay. You won't miss your mark. There's still time to bloom. There's still time. There's plenty. It's really lovely that way, for giving like that sort of hope. Chicory's hope too. Okay, so I'm going to stop, and I will just offer that before the questions start. This is my book, Flowers for a Girl. Oh, look, it also says click to add text. Sorry. So you can purchase it at Amazon, or you can go to my website and purchase it from Lulu, which is kinder to authors than Amazon. And then on my website, I have a page with a lot of free resources on plant medicine, and particularly sexual trauma. There's a lot of free podcasts that I've done and classes that I've taught. And there's one class that I did with Botanic Wise, the Mid-Atlantic Conference. And I think that one's $22. That's the only one that costs anything on that page. But it's like one of the best ones I ever did. So those are just some other, that's another resource. And this book is written in a poetic way. It's very gentle. I don't think you have to be afraid of it. I haven't had anyone write to me or contact me and say that was too much for me, because I don't write about what happened so much as I write about the plants and how they came and tell the stories, and more, you're not supposed to like use the word healing, but I don't really know, like that's what I experienced. But I am especially speaking of that in an emotional way, you know, how it came in. All right, so I will stop there. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about all of it. And then I'll just open it up for questions in the chat, because I couldn't really see it very well.
So I can mention a couple of the questions on the chat.
Okay.
Amanda, it's wonderful material. I'm loving it. One of the first questions was about which variety of rose to use. If you had one that you prefer or recommend.
No, I don't have one that I prefer or recommend, just the usual that you would hear, which is we don't want it to be sprayed. I do tend to move towards the wild rose, but I've also used the cultivated. And then it is said that the more fragrant the rose, the more medicine. I have tended with sexual trauma, at least, to work more with pink roses and white roses. I haven't worked as much with the red because it's almost too much. And I remember right before I started to remember everything, after I saw the room so clearly, on my way home from class that night, I wanted to buy myself roses, and which I'd never done. And I remember when I stopped, I ended up getting a bouquet that was pink and white. And I just think there's like a gentler, softer to those, but I don't have a particular variety. Rose is rose, you know, especially the way I was speaking about it in a general way.
There's also a question, Rebecca Dallinger, about, I think you were talking about anger, and now I'm confused whether it was black cohosh or cleavers, but you were talking about anger, and she's correlating it with the liver and wondering if it, I don't know, Rebecca, maybe you can follow up. I can't remember what exactly you meant by that.
Yes, so anger is often connected with the liver. That's true. And so dandelion root would go there to the liver to work with the anger. Cleavers, I'm not aware of cleavers having a connection to the liver. It really was connected to heart, like the way that it wasn't anger, it was rage that might lodge in the heart. So I don't know what the connection with that might be with the liver and how we do often connect it to anger, but it was a rage that was in the heart, a rage that was in the waters. But she's right. Often if we are dealing with anger, we are going to go to the liver, and we're going to use a lot of roots. And there's a lot of plants, you know, we could list off. Chicory is not, I haven't used that particularly for anger, but black cohosh, blue vervain, you know, so many of them, you would go to the liver. And a lot of it is with the liver, it's having to process everything anyway. We know that. So it's when we're doing this sort of work, we are going to need to support it, because it's already had to move through quite a lot, and now it's going to be in a more concentrated way. So if you find yourself being more angrier, how do we say it? You know, you can bring in some of those plants. So I don't know if that answers her question.
It looks like it did look like she was clarifying. And then also Carolyn, I don't know if you can see, has a question. Yeah, in the chat.
So I just say that because, you know, as herbalists, they will say the FDA and other people don't want you to say that you heal or that you diagnose or anything like that. You know, because they would say like that was practicing medicine and this sort of thing. And so I'm okay with, I'm okay. I get what they're saying. That's all right. So I'll use words like integrate, process, balance. But for me personally, that is how I have experienced them. That is how I have experienced them. And so it's not because I'm opposite to that word or negative towards it. I think it's a true and a real word. I just know, like, I don't want anybody to have any, you know, difficulties or fusses, you know, because I chose to use it. And I don't know if I know they feel that way about the physical body, but I don't know if they feel that way about the emotional and spiritual body. The Bible passage that I associated with Tulip Poplar, it was Isaiah. Oh, and I'm trying to remember the chapter at this time. I used to be able to flip this off like that, but part of my trauma, sadly, has also been the church. So I will, in the follow-up email that she does, I will send the chapter from Isaiah where it talks about setting captives free, and it's really a lovely passage. So I will do that. And then, are there any other questions? Let's see. How I dose. Okay. Yes. So I am like Matt. I do tend to use drop doses. Because for me, I feel like if, like Matt, if I've got the right plant, I don't need very much, you know? And also with the way that I'm working with the plants myself, as you can tell from listening to me talk, I tend towards the emotional, energetic, spiritual aspects of the plants. So I'm using them in more of a flower essence vibrational way. So I tend to use drop doses. Like, I really cannot think of any plant that I've used for myself or recommended to others where I've said take 15 to 30 drops. That's not how I'm working with people when they're working through trauma. You know, I'll say take 3 to 5, at most 5 to 10. And part of that is like when your body's ready, like something with black cohosh, and you may end up with this rash that raises up. We don't need to force that. We don't need to overdo it. So just start small. That's how I work, and to be gentle, and then just to see, you know, how the body responds. I also noticed that someone put violet, you know, for a breast cancer remedy. Yeah, and there's so much there with the lymph, but also the chest area where we're holding grief, you know, and those sorts of things with violet. Yeah, so I'm going to see if there's any other questions. Let's see. Oh, you guys are so kind. Thank you for your words. Do I work with yarrow? I do. I haven't brought in yarrow very much for trauma work, particularly. Like, it's not one that I would often put in one of my presentations or classes, but I do use it in the ways that Matt talks about it, like for the wounded warrior. I also do use it for people that, well, a flower essence where we take on others' emotions. So it's not just that we feel them, but we take them into ourselves, which a lot of people will say, well, that's just being empathic and it's a gift. And yes, but it is also a trauma response often. You know, I don't know. Everything's so complicated sometimes and complex, but I feel that when we experience trauma, it often opens us up to feel and experience the world in a way we might not have otherwise. People that have experienced trauma are often more sensitive to the emotions and feelings of others. And especially depending on the home you may have been in or certain settings, you're taking it into your body. You know, so for yarrow is really lovely for when you're taking on and in the emotions of others. That's one of the ways that I work on it. I have no doubt, it being yarrow and its connection to the blood and to the womb, that it has many other aspects that could tie in with trauma, but I haven't used it that way. I do make my own flower essences, but I also like to get them from other people too. And someone asked, are there some that I recommend? And I'll put this link in the email that goes out. I mentioned Deb Vale, and her business is called Grandparents of the Forest. She and her partner create them, and they're just beautiful. And she has a lot of like spring ephemerals and the really rare plants that you'd find here in the mountains, and just so many. It's just lovely and magical and diverse what she offers. And then of course, you know, you have Bach and you have like the flower essence society or group, but an individual, I really liked it so much. And I will say also that Sophia Rose of, I think it's La Abeja herbs, Labeeja. I believe she's the one that has the ghost pipe flower essence. And then someone asked here anything with lily. So there are a couple of lilies. One is Mariposa Lily, which is a flower essence society, that one that you can get. That one I have not touched on too much myself. It's a little strong for me because it's very connected to mother issues and trauma, and so the loss of a mother, having a mother speak to us in certain ways, or these things are very connected with Mariposa Lily. Matt uses Easter lily, which I have a really lovely story about that, but Easter lily for like purification. I experienced it as a baptism. We can feel when certain types of trauma happen to us, especially sexual trauma, that now we're tainted and we're dirty. That's how we can feel, but we're not. But it's how we feel. It's how our body will respond, even with our cycles. So bringing in Easter lily for a baptism, a cleansing, a purification, returning to that. And I think Matt talks about with the Easter lily being for those that, like, how did he put it? I'm going to be careful with like the words that I use, but where there can be this complexity with our relationship to our sexuality because of trauma, where it's like the virgin and the not so virgin, these extremes, that we can have, and where we're really not comfortable with our sexuality one way or the other. So we can have these extremes. And so like a way of finding a balance with it. Let's see, there's a couple of other questions real quick, and then I think our time is up. Do you have a practice where you directly seek to speak? Yeah. Well, so it does come up naturally now, but I did this interview with this gentleman, Angel Deer, and I think the interview's on YouTube, and it was a really lovely conversation. He's really good at interviews. And he asked me, so what do? You talk about plants like they're people, like you have conversations with them. And I told him, you just go outside and you just sit with them. And that, I hope that's not disappointing, but even if you just begin with just a few minutes, 5 minutes being outside with the intention of being present, they feel your intention, your heart knows your intention, and you will begin to hear in whatever way you hear. It can be you feel it in your body, you see something, or maybe you do really hear something, but you'll know that you're beginning to communicate. And so it's very simple. That's how I've experienced it. It's to go and to sit, or with people now where I do sessions virtually, I'll pull up a picture and we'll sit with it together for just a couple moments and then we'll share. But now I find like sometimes when I'm outside, it just happens. And I believe when the plants want to speak to you, it will just happen. Because remember I told you the first tree to talk to me was Tulip Poplar? That was also right when I was just beginning to communicate with plants at all. And so I really didn't know what to expect, or what I was doing. Well, after Tulip Poplar did that day, I was walking back to my car, not thinking about any other plant or tree, not even really being able to identify very many other plants or trees. And then suddenly I'm walking and I'm not even looking at it. And this black walnut calls out, I can tighten you up and clean you out. And I was like, oh, okay. But it's like when they want you to know, they will speak. And that's a good one to use also for trauma, because as Matt talks about, the link breaker, codependency and things like that you can have, it breaks the links. So, but I think that the more that we're intentional, the more that it will just happen naturally, because we're open and they know that that we're open. All right, I probably have to stop. Let me look. Oh, someone was mentioning Tulip Poplar. Let's see, let me just address this. Tulip Poplar doesn't grow here. I sometimes wonder about working with plants that are unfamiliar to us. I feel we're less likely to have a deeper relationship with them, so I'm unsure about how I feel about working with them. Well, if they don't call to you, then they don't call to you. But if they do, and I am one that's very much for the medicine that I need is around me. It's here. It's right outside my door. It's in my area. I don't have to go to China, to get it. But I also believe that the medicine is vibrational and energetic and spiritual. And also the world is getting quite bigger with the internet and the way that we connect. And so I do think there are plants that I'll probably never have a relationship with because they're not part of my place. But I'm open to a plant that might come that I might not ever have seen in person, or I might not ever meet in person, that wants to come to me, you know. But if they don't call to you, you know, that's okay. But I feel like if they are for us, we can pair up, you know, we can match up with them. And I do send tulip poplar like all over the United States and the world. Because sometimes when people are talking to me, that's the plant that comes. I know its words. But yeah, that's really a personal choice and decision. And you can just see how you feel and what comes and how you're led. That's totally fine. But it's good to just be, you know, open to possibilities, because I don't want to like miss out on a friend. Okay, I'll let that be. I think we have just enough time.
Right on
Thank you guys
time.
so much.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. I can see the chat. Everyone's so grateful. Really wonderful information. I'm going to stop the recording here. Oh, I think it might, I still might not be the record. Oh, hang on one second, folks. Just a second, because I am not currently the reclaim host. Aha, now I can turn off the reaction. Okay. So thank you so much. So many wonderful comments, such interesting things to think about, and great information. Really appreciate you and what you bring to this work. We will have a follow-up email, so check your emails. If you don't get our newsletter, please, you can sign up for it on our website, nchg.org, and you'll get it in your mailbox, and we'll have recordings and links. Maybe we'll find that Bible verse and all the good stuff will be in the YouTube recording, and so forth. I think Amanda was going to have a coupon code too, special for us, for the Guild. So you can watch for that. Coming up for the Guild, we have on December 8th, we've got the Plant Savers, Eco Herbalism, should be very good. Susan Leopold's going to be presenting. And I think that's it for the year. We might watch your inbox for some information about the board, and we might do a fun little fundraiser-y thing. But that's our year. It's been great. So thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks to everyone for coming, and we'll hopefully see you all next time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.